Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show here in Ventura, California, with a brilliant producer and problem solver, extremely creative person who is enjoying the spiritual qualities of bringing people together, like-minded people, to make groove-based music. JP Hesser, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Yeah, stoked to be here, man. Thanks for
the chair.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, so let's go through this.
Yeah.
Breaking a log jam in the studio.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Yeah.
A specific example.
Yeah, absolutely. So, touching upon just the idea of a team being part of the energy of a room. And, as an engineering perspective, it sort of has its own, I don't want to say rules or boundaries, but sort of an area where you do your job there.
Sure.
That's the goal. You have another half of what you do in the studio, and that's really about negotiating and feeling out the energy of the room and where the issue is and how to solve this problem or whatever the situation is. I mean, we talked just briefly about a rhythmic issue, as the idea would then not to go to the drummer and just lay into the drummer, because that's going to kill the whole vibe of what that individual is attempting to do. And the idea that if it's something that we're having an issue with, hopefully we're pushing the boundaries and attempting to really lift the overall energy of the project, of that song. And but I've been with enough people over the years in these different rooms and scenarios to really just attempt to communicate a language that they can understand and where the trouble might lie and how we can solve this. And sometimes it's a matter of being creative and what the headphone is for that individual. Maybe they're hearing too much of this or not enough of this, or they just need to focus on the drums and the bass, and the guitar players in left field might be affecting what's going on with the overall picture of what's being cut. So using some techniques or just communicating with people, I think.
Linguistics, though, how did you learn to communicate with people? I mean, to me, sometimes I'm not a producer, but my angst or my impatience can come across as curt or alienating sometimes. And again, I mean, did you learn the hard way, or you've always been a linguist in the studio?
Well, that's interesting.
Or maybe someone you learned from where you were like, oh, he really diffused that, and it brought, because here's the point. Maybe this is the better question. The studio albums that I love to listen to, it sounds like it's live because the vibe is so high.
Absolutely.
Because everyone's having creative freedom.
Absolutely.
So what are the antecedents? How do you create that?
Sure.
Because you've gotten good at that.
Yeah. And that's something that, I don't think a lot of people pay attention to when they're attempting to go out and make a record.
No.
They don't realize the fifth wheel for what it is, coming into the picture and having to be part of the flow of what's going on. And I mean, as we discussed, the last time we talked, my goal was to be as transparent as possible with the CRB records. When I had the chance to sit with those guys for a couple months, it really was all about letting the band breathe. And if there was moments where I had a thought, or if CR was just like, hey, you're down there, you're hearing this, like, are we in a good spot? And it was usually CR and Neil. Neil was definitely interested in like where I was at. Hence the reason why I was even in the chair for those sessions.
But he would come to you, and that would give you, permission to.
Yeah.
You weren't smothering people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also knew when it was like something was happening or something wasn't happening.
Right.
And you understand the resistance at times of a problem and what you might have a solution to the problem, and you have to approach that really with kid gloves. There's times when you're just in that space where you're trying to communicate with someone and say, hey, look, like, we're not getting this bit right, what is it, what should it be, and so a lot of times people go, well, I don't know, maybe, and they go, well, here we go, maybe this is what we need to do, is take the moment, take a deep breath, and collectively feel, what should this be? And you know, if you're working with talented people, it's really not about.
Well, that's the other part
performance,
of it.
You know,
I
that
mean,
is a huge part of making a good record. You know, I mean.
Well, because also, like, I think talented people, you correct me if I'm wrong, but they're pretty adaptable. So if you're asking them to do something, even if it's outside their comfort zone, they're not going to be resistant to it. They're going to try it, and it
Right.
probably will work.
Right.
I mean, when you look at the lineage of engineers and producers, who is somebody, we just talked a little bit about Botnick and other cats like that, legendary names, amazing, came up at a very different time, came up at an analog time.
Yeah.
Who's somebody that you continue to draw from in terms of, you know, the idea of genius is making something that seems very difficult, very simple, or very clear.
Right.
And I just wonder who is somebody that you, in the lineage of your own, you know,
Yeah.
who's an influence to you that still to this day it just always hits.
Yeah, is it crazy? It's crazy because having the chance to sit with Botnick back in January.
God bless.
Was just, you know, the conversation was brief between the two of us because I was in the middle of other things
Sure.
at that point in time. But when we did have a chance to chat, you know, I didn't even know that he was the guy.
Dude, I'm going to give you his phone number because I just feel like you
it's-
guys could.
It's just insane,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So, like, all of a sudden,
You weren't hip
know,
to him. His-
no,
his- yeah, I did.
no,
I
heard
did.
the
I
name,
love
and I
it,
was like,
dude.
I'm terrified already.
I love
with
it.
what I was doing that day.
Oh, man.
But to have the opportunity to sit down and like go through the list and go, holy smokes, like this guy has done so many great records that I really appreciate. And the Gabor records were one of the things that we were able to touch on. And I think it was.
Was the Bobby Womack Gabor album?
Yeah, he did that. He also did the later, like, Night Flight. I want to say some of those later.
Oh, totally. Yeah, those I'm not as hip to that.
They're really good records. And
What do you like about that Night Flight? Talk about that.
well, there's another one that's got it's a green LP with the broom on the front.
Oh my God, dude, that's dude Keltner.
Yeah.
First of all, the name's escape. That's a marijuana leaf.
Is it really that goes
and
around
dude,
the
Bruce
thing?
Krasnow, when they did that album, that made the nightly news.
Oh my God.
They were
Oh, yeah.
ostracized because
Oh,
of
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
It was but no, that album is ridiculous. And they're all in the back doing all sorts of debauchery.
Not so how.
But talk about that album.
Yeah, so
the
let's
breath.
just pick
Yeah.
that up for that. Is the idea there is that if I'm approaching something where I'm listening to what's going on, I mean, the first thing is just like what's the depth of field? Does it sound like it's this slick production that is isolating
Right.
everybody, or does it sound like a cohesive collective entity that's all on the same page? And in Bruce's case with the engineering on some of those records, it's really special because you have the sonics of a Rhodes and where it plays its role, and you have the sonics of the drum and the bass rhythm section and how much bottom there is to the groove, and then you've got Gabor and the choice of how they achieved his guitar tones, and you know, a fusing
Magical Connection, it's called.
Magical Connection. That's it. Dang, that's good.
Now hold on though, but let's be clear.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you fill that sonic space when you're doing so much stuff in isolation now? Back then they had
Right.
Wolfgang. I mean,
Right.
they were
Right.
hitting at the same time. Gabor was just like, let's just hit.
Let's get in the rim.
So
and
how do
hit
you
it.
do that to make it
Yeah.
still authentic? That to me, maybe that's
Right.
just the secret of the secret sauce.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely the isolation aspect can be a little bit of a crutch in a scenario, but it's also nice if you know that you have a long-term picture of what you need to take, because there are times when you know that the rest, say for instance, it's a four-piece, you got drums and bass and guitar, maybe two guitars or guitars and keys or something that's delivering four directions
Right.
of sound, and something's not right on one of those, or something's not 100% on. So the isolation can be okay. You've got to work through that if you need to get to the next level, and you want to build just your rhythm section, and then you're going to come back around to building these other things. So if you're isolating in Castaway in the back room, you know, I have basically 7 different spaces that I can work with to achieve some sense of separation. However, one of the elements that I've been working on recently is keeping doors open. So even though they're still isolating these, like a guitar amp or a bass amp or a Leslie or something that I'm running, and I'm trying to bring that into the fold to make a collective live band setting, I'll keep the doors open.
For a little bleed.
If the part's there, yeah, because everything's blowing into that back room, and there's
it.
just this extra sense of aura that happens when you solo the drums and you still hear just the faintest versions of what's going on. And sometimes we laugh about it, because if it's a total clam situation, then you go back over and you build a new guitar, and the inside put is like, listen right here, there's like a whole little clip of that old guitar solo still playing in the background, but you treat it to make it somehow still fit part of the song. So, you know, I like to do both. I think more so in the last couple years, I've been keeping doors open and isolating the elements that are coming at me. I've also had experience putting everything on the floor. I've worked with some, you know, like country swing, almost like rockabilly kind of guys. Chris Story is a drummer in Santa Barbara that plays in some killer bands, and he brought this guy Kyle in and plays a double neck guitar, and they wanted it to all just be like bang, like you listen to an Ernest Tubb record, and everybody's in the same room, and you hear the grunts and the moans, and sometimes you hear the call out or this or that, but that's just what makes it exciting, as how that delivers it, you know. So you have a different approach to things. With hip hop, obviously it's just like you just get in there and you're cutting vocals on top of a beat, or if you have a live band setting, you are isolating vocals because you want that intimate experience on the vocal and not make it sound like they're in a giant hall together. You know?
Do you feel like you've I guess just for cats out there that are going to see this, you know, if they want to come here, what is it about, what are you going to tell them? Like, what makes you unique? To me, like, we have a glut. We have a there's a glut of broadcasters. There's gluts of musicians, and producers. But yet, you know, your niche. If you could encapsulate it, what would it be? Fearlessness? I mean, even is there adjectives? Is it, you know,
yeah.
I don't even know.
Well, you know, funny bit with it, because I would say there's always butterflies when you're stepping into a room with people, and they're there to spend
every
their
time
hard-earned cash to, you know, have you take a picture of what's going on. But I do think that over the years, one of the elements that I've talked about, probably even with you, is just being transparent about the process. If we want something to sound a certain way, I'm here to achieve that goal for you. So if you're groundbreaking, but you still kind of have like Eagles vibe, or, you know, like we were talking about Tony Joe White, you know, you want to kind of thing. So there's tools that you then use in order to be able to put together that particular sonic sound. And my contribution is hopefully would be to keep the energy moving, keep it flowing, keep the forward motion of what we're working on. And even if we have to do something again by way of having to come back around with some sonic thing, or just a different take or whatever, you know, that like you just want to step into that room and believe that the techniques that you've developed over 23 years now is like that. I try to make the engineering aspect out of sight, so that the players aren't consumed with a 4-hour setup before they have to start recording. I like to get everything set up on Friday night. So I like to start at 7:00 at night on Friday and work for 3 or 4 hours and get to hang and listen to records and talk about what it is that we're going for, and really try to get inside of each individual's idea of what it is that they'd like to get from the record, or from their performance for that matter.
Ultimately, there could be too many cooks in the kitchen at some point. And
And I guess that's up to the leader.
You know,
so the Friday night thing, what works about that at Castaway is that if we knock out Friday night, if I'm doing a weekend slot, what I'll do is that I'll spend the entire first evening and I just donate that to the client. I don't charge people for Friday night setup, because I want to have all of my work out of the way, and everybody feeling good. Everybody's headphones sound great. They get in the room, like by the end of the night, they're able to take a track and I send them home and say, this is what your record's going to sound like tomorrow when you come in. Like, if there's holes in this, let's talk about those and try to sort through those details ahead of time, so that tomorrow at 2, when we hit 8 hours, we come in, we turn things on, we make some slight adjustment, and bang, we're going. Like, that, I think, is key. I have a friend that just caught a record up in Santa Barbara, and he spent like the first 6 hours of the day setting up and getting sounds for the entire band. And I'm like, how did that feel by the time the 7th hour rolled around and you were
Exhausting.
about to... He's like, I was so burned out from banging on toms and tuning drums that like it took, I practically cooked the rest of the day just because I was frazzled. And we joked about it because, you know, in the past that was the idea, is that we always wanted to have things laid out in front of us. And, you know, a passing through like Scott Pemberton came through last year, and that was like, I got in early that day because he played the night before in town, and then he cruised in the next day. It was just like, Scott, come in and cut some tracks, you know? So I didn't have the Friday night setup, but I came in early that morning and I got everything laid out so that they could just kind of roll in, and the majority of the engineering aspect was out of the way, and we could just focus on getting the things together in a short period of time. So I think that would be one of the things, and that's
I love that. And it's also, let's be clear, I mean, that's essentially pro bono. I mean, that Friday night.
Well, it is.
You know, and what I'm saying is, you know, ultimately, I guess that's the other thing I have to say is, like, Neely just sort of popped into my head here, but he may not be the best example, but, you know, like, can you talk about, like, the love that you have for what you do?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, again, we all have to sing for a supper, and you admittedly have, you know, it's the roller coaster of life trying to sing for your supper.
Sure.
And there's this fine line between getting taken advantage of and getting paid for your services.
Yeah,
and I want you to talk to younger cats about advocating for that while still bringing love to the table.
Absolutely. There's a couple angles to that. I recently spent a day down in Anaheim for the NAMM show, and I caught a half-hour bit with CLA, Chris Lord-Ouch, like talking about knowing your worth as a human being.
Right.
It's like something that you want to do. He's like, you don't negotiate money. The gardeners negotiate money. You know, like, the idea is to be able to put yourself into a place where people are there because they want to work with you, and they want whatever experience that you can bring to the table. You know, I get to a point in life where I have a collection of great records that I've been able to work on over the years, and, you know, I had to work there in order to present that to someone. A few realize how much work it actually takes to be able to present something that they like.
Right.
You know, and, you know, I guess coming back into that is that finding the balance of being in business and also loving what you do. If you don't love being an engineer and working in the studio, and you just considering it a job, it's probably just going to be one of many jobs that you have over
Totally.
your career. I mean,
How have you learned to advocate? I mean, especially you've worked with a lot of luminary people. Sometimes it's like they already know the game, but as a young cat, you don't necessarily know the game.
yeah, you don't.
So I would wind up putting my foot in my mouth.
Yes.
But, you know, like, that's in itself. Like,
Yes.
how have you learned to navigate with people that you're like,
Yeah.
I cannot believe I'm in the same room with this person?
Lord. Yeah.
Do you trust in the fact that they know and they will come back? Because my feeling is sometimes I've just heard horror stories along the way.
I got a few of them. I mean, you know, we all do. Like,
so what I'm saying is, you have the
but-
war scars.
Yeah. So yeah, you learn from those things. You learn from the dynamics of what the end result is that what are they really asking for you to do? I mean, first of all, just being clear about, am I mixing this? Am I tracking this? Am I producing this?
Right.
Like, is this, what roles do you, you know, would you like to get from walking through these doors out of me? You know, is it a matter of the songwriting process? Is it a matter of tone generation? So am I sitting there and going through, you know, some rad guitar tones with a guitar player, or do they just have their thing together? You
Right.
know, so I think a lot of that is changing the way that you're approaching those moments. But for sure, in the end of it is that at the end of the day, the exhaustion of being in the studio is the greatest feeling in the world. When you know that you have put every ounce of your juju into the work and the sounds, and you believe in what it is that you've done in that moment is the best that you can do. Because 10 years from now, you might get a call from a client and say, hey, I need to remix this track, or I lost this stem, and I lost the 2-track, and I have the session file, and you pull it up. And I'm going off of this because this recently happened to me, where I did something about 10 years ago, and the client kept the flash drive with the session on it, and they delivered it to me, and I loaded the track up, and I listened to I listened to the mix, the final mix that I had done 10 years ago, and I took a seat. I sat down, and I thought that was great. How cool. It wasn't perfect. It's not who I am now, but I can be proud of that moment coming back. If you're going to do this, you're going to do it for a long time, because the overnight success of being an engineer or producer is I don't even know what that means.
It's true.
It's just straight up learning how to approach making a record is something that you have to definitely work at every single day that you're in the studio. And fearlessness is the other aspect of it. Is if something's not right, you just don't have to stick to it because it's the only way, or that's the way that you have to do something. You really have to throw all that out and go, you know what, I always put it here, but kind of sounds like it needs to be right there this time, and you try that out. But and then going on that record that track is the 2-track that I worked on, is that I called the client and I was like, this track was great. They needed a high quality version, and all we had was an MP3. So I pitched it to them that I could sit down for a few hours, and I could take those tracks that were in front of me, and I could remix it as I'm currently where I'm at now. And it was a little terrifying, because obviously someone's been listening to that MP3 for 10 years, that you're going to give them something that's not totally different, but different enough that it better damn well be good, because they want the old thing, but this one better be good. If they're going to spend a couple $100 to have you redo something, you got to be able to deliver. And I just remember, I didn't even, at first, when I got the track, I knew that there was no way for me to go back on the old session. So I just started with a blank slate with the tracks, and I did not listen to the original track first. I wasn't interested in the MP3 because I knew I couldn't do anything with that. So I was like, I have to mix this thing, and he's willing to let me mix this thing again. I want to start with a clear head. I don't want to be intimidated by something I did in the past. So I digressed with that a moment, because I mixed, and as I was listening to everything that I cut from that, 10 years for me is multi-hundreds of albums and maybe 1,000 musicians, a lot of life experience. Not only that, but just life experience of where you're at this point in time. But I was so stoked to hear what I was hearing when I pulled the drums up as they were, when they came in, with no effects, just right from the floor. And I was like, wow, you were doing something cool even 10 years ago, right? So I mixed it, and then I finally loaded the MP3 at the bottom of the session, and I had done a print on my new version, and I printed it, I saved it, and then I just soloed the MP3, and I sat back, and I was like, I kicked its ass, first of all, but I was still like, that's great. That was great. There's nothing wrong with what was there. It's just really cool to have the opportunity, and I don't do that very often. But why I come around to that is that if you believe, and I've been believing that the best that I can do is what I want at the end of the day. And 10 years ago, I signed off because it was the best that I could do. And it was my experience level, it was my gear level, it was just all of the things that make me and the studio what it is to this day, is that's why those tracks still sounded good from 10 years ago. And I think people get consumed with being able to do something half-heartedly possibly, and then using some effect to make it better. But in the school of thought, for me, is get it, make it sound good now.
Feel good.
Make it come in balance, and going, just so we can pause on that for a moment, and going to the Cats record, when I cut that one, Adam and I, we were originally set out to do one set for 5 nights. We didn't plan on doing 5 sets in 5 nights for those shows. Our goal was to get 50 minutes of music that Kreutzmann's son could just
hopefully just play it low enough.
The same thing each night, and everybody be like, yeah, cool, whatever. So in doing so, suddenly it became Justin's like, can I get a little more of that? But that's the thing. It's like, can I get some more of that? And then we were like, well, he likes it. So like we gave him like one track, right? And then all of a sudden he's like, give me as much of that shit as you can give me because I'm going to use it all. So going then into the next bit would be, we had to get sounds. We were on such a weird, crazy deadline that there was no post work. It was like, I remember, just listening to what was coming in and just like holding my breath for 30 minutes, like for multiple reasons, because I didn't want the computer to crash in the middle of a 25-minute, track or 12-minute Gilbert's Groove or something. You know what I mean? Like your stress levels are just through the roof, and the one thing that just kept
also we're really cooking too. That was the other thing. It wasn't like it was a done.
We didn't do 2 takes of any of those on that. So that's the thing, is that coming to your engineering skills is that putting in place something that feels good as it comes in. And Adam and I had very, very little time to go back in and actually mix the record for the vinyl. Then they gave us a little bit of time because the shows went off and everybody freaked out, and then all of a sudden we had gas work and
you could tune it up
mixing.
A little bit.
We could go in and like we could move the mix around a little bit. We still didn't push the overdubs because we were stoked with what was there, and it was just really fun to be part of such a lightning in a bottle, that you were being pushed so far beyond your comfort zone. And I think of the CRB records, and I think of being pushed where when CR called me and asked me to do those records, that I just remember, I think I got tipped. Neil tipped me, and he's like, hey, just for what it's worth, you might get a call, you might not, who knows, but just know that he's talking about things. And then I get a phone call from a random phone number, and I'm like, hey, it's Castaway, and it was Chris, and he's like, I'd like you to make these records for us, and are you interested? And maybe like half of me was like choking up, and the other half was like, yes, I got this, no problem.
Sure.
And that's the idea of what to carry on as an engineer, is that just say yes, man, figure it out. Because if you're really in it, you're gonna learn more in 1 week with someone, with a band, a really good band. You're gonna learn more in 1 week than you could spend years of working on your own, with things. So
I'm so happy to be here. One final question for you, because he didn't divulge the real story. You went to Skull and Roses and saw Circles. And Dan Horn, I'm gonna get you, bro. And Dan Horn gave some milk toast. I want you to tell the story.
Well,
the floor's yours.
No, it's all right. I'm pushed against the door here, but I don't know.
It was Castaway 7 Studios, man.
It's just so
the point is that Dan was like, this is our second home, and then but in reality the story should have been what?
Well, I just thought that it would have been a fantastic joke prequel to One for Chuck would be to tell the story of why it's One for Chuck, and not that he sees him at Lassen's or something.
Right.
I don't. That's beyond me. But Chuck came in that night that we were cutting a track, and I actually remember. I remember the experience of what that was like, because I felt like I was really working to clear the space on my end to be able to do a good job for those guys, and we were under a relatively narrow band of being able to have this many days and get this done, and we had cut a few cool tracks at that point, and I know there was one that the band was rubbing, and they were trying to work through some things and to come to this space. And so I might have even been to the point that we took a break, and we're all in the front room just breathing, having some beverages, reflecting on what it is that we needed to bang out that evening and what this track needed to be. And in walks Chuck. And at the time, Neil was just like, hey, Chuck, how's it going? Sit down, like, how you doing? And they had, he was always really impressed. I love the Chuck and the Neil relationship was always was super cool to watch the two of them together, because they came from, I mean, Neil was in New York for a while, and like there was just like a really cool respect for one another.
That's beautiful.
And the same with Chuck and Tennille. And so of course he's going to sit down and he's telling us a story about like the fires that happened here, that and his house and all that, and it was several minutes that he was here. I'm guessing like, let's say 5 minutes that he was here, and Dan was in the restroom, and I remember standing at the back door, and I saw Chuck sitting on the chair, and everybody's just like this to Uncle Chuck, like picking his brain and, whatever was going on, and listening to this crazy story of the flames coming over his house and whatnot. And Dan walks out of the restroom, and I see him come out the door, and he sees that it's Chuck. And he turns around and he goes back into the restroom and closes the door for like another minute. And I thought we all rolled, because we were like, he kind of looked over and we were all laughing, because he just like, I felt like he was just,
I mean, how awkward is it to walk in? I mean, it's
no idea what was just happening while he was in the restroom taking a piss.
That is so beautiful.
So I just thought that would have been a funny story about why it was one for Chuck. And,
Well, JP, I just want to say, man, it's such an honor to be here with you, and I always enjoy collaborating with you, and I definitely know that
killer.
The spirit is alive and well, and I really I'm happy to see you on the upswing with all these various projects, and we will do a lot more.
Yeah. Do you have a minute on one? I'd like to chat about one real
Absolutely,
quick. Okay,
man.
So I don't know if you're hip to Katie Skeen. If she's been on your radar.
Oh, I love her.
Okay,
Yeah.
so she came in and cut tracks with me, and
John Molos. Yeah, Forgy told me this story.
I love it.
Forgy told me a great story about that session.
Great.
He said that they were like, yeah, we're gonna bring this cat Sam in to play a solo, and Mo was like, who is this cat? And so Blasucci came in from Apache, and he played this solo, and Mo was like, yeah, let's do it, man.
Yeah, let's get it. Yeah. That was for sure. And I'm like, oh, another thing to add into the mix at the time.
Oh, I see. So yeah.
So there was definitely like, holy smokes. Okay, what do I need to do? What do we have? Do we have a guitar? Do we need an amp? What are we providing here, and whatnot? So, but John, that experience working with John is a special one worth repeating. Is that in 2004, I believe 2000 into 2005, New Year's Eve at Bill Graham, with Ryan Adams, I want to say, and maybe Schofield, and John Mayer's Blues Trio opening at the Bill Graham, New Year's Eve. Molo, Phil, my neighbor, old head, is like, I'm taking you to kick the blues. We're going to San Francisco. We're going to go see Phil, Lesh, and friends. And I was like, cool, like that sounds fun to me. Let's go check it out. I had no idea what I was getting into, but John was just he came from another planet. Him and Phil at that time, there was just like no better dynamic duo. So when John arrived for Katie's session, he was the first one here that day. He came in early to get drums set up and get dialed in for her thing, and I asked her if he could come by like an hour or two early so we could just get drums and be able to powwow a little bit and just like get around like what it is that we were going for from him. And I remember him getting out of his car here, and he stands. I think he had to duck to get in.
Oh,
I mean, he's a big guy.
Dude, when he was unemployed, he was running hoops back in the day.
Yeah, he took up the whole doorway to get in, and I just remember standing. I was in the back room doing some work, and I looked out, and there was this ginormous frame of an individual, and I walked into the room, and I was like, dang, dude, I'm like, this is the greatest thing for me right now. Like, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing right now stems from the very evening or two that I spent in San Francisco all those years ago, watching him and Phil, in the people, in the brotherhood and the sisterhood of like how everything is just one unit up there. And I just wanted to be, to let you know I'm just super grateful for what you've done, and thanks for coming in for Katie. And it was like we were best friends. We spent the next 2 hours just telling stories and like setting drums up. And I said, would you mind if I kind of, do a couple things to this? And he's like, hey man, like you do you, right? So he gave me all of the space to make the adjustments to things the way that I envisioned how I was hoping to hear those tracks for her. And I remember one of them was just like, hey, would it be cool if I pull the head off the kick drum because I like to do a certain thing? And he's like, oh dude, that's an OG, of course, let me get that, and I've had resistance in times when people are like, wow, that's my drum sound, whatever. And I'm like,
dude,
cool,
he's so
problem.
open,
but
man.
he was way into
I did. I love it.
He was way into
Sick.
it. And I wish that like I could claim that there's a testimonial, but he's like, bro, I was just at a studio like 10 days ago and it was a multi-million-dollar facility. And he's like, this guy took 6 hours to get sounds, and he's like, in the first 45 minutes you had the best drum sound that I could have asked for in that moment for this record. So he didn't
feel it was his place to say. To me, sometimes that's just the foibles of a foolish, too much money and too many just wanking it, where I would be deferential to I mean, why would you not know that?
Not at all. He was the coolest cat to just roll.
Oh, great. I mean, such an excess. I'm still trying to get him to get me to Roger McNamee. I got to send you those Molo interviews too.
Yes.
But wow, we got the dog over here.
Yeah.
JP, man, we got a lot more to do, baby.
Yeah, buddy.
Much love to you.
I can't wait. We have some cool things cooking.
Yeah,
so.
man. And I'm really psyched that you're on. Stay in the moment, man.
Totally. And I hope that people catch some C6 Steve too. That's something that I brought to your attention. That was a record that I had worked on back in March, and I know that we're gonna do some cool things with that by the end of this year. And I hope Katie's got, I think we released 3 and we have like 6 or 7 more. I know we have a whole bunch more that I'm hoping to get out and get that together. And, I just want to stay on top of it and, continue. Let's do a quick walkthrough.
All right, let's do it.
While you're, while we'll share the space. Let me flip a couple lights on.
Oh, it's beautiful. Actually, it's incredible. It looks amazing in here.
Well, it's not. I guess it's just not the front door of the studio. They might as well.
All right.
Feinberg show followers.
Dude, Castaway 7, dude.
Yeah. Killer.
Take us home.
Right. Getting all that together.
Wow.
Which, by the way, the C6 Steve record, when I was in New Zealand and he had spent some time here rehearsing, and I said, hey man, do you want, I'll leave a couple guitars out for you while you rehearse while I'm gone. And then it was like a week into being gone, and he texted me and he said, I don't know what is going on with that Telecaster that you have there, but there's some extra special juju in that. And I said, that's the guitar that Neil Gasol left me when he passed away. And no shit, he played that guitar the entire session when we did that. And so on the back end of it, I can't wait, because I want people to like this. It's the home of, like, there's these random things that are here.
It's real.
It just means something that when we get this great guitar tone, we always go, hey Neil, like, how's that? Did we do a good job today? So he's forever in our hearts and our minds, and
he's here.
I don't think
he's here. I mean, I can feel him right now.
I bet, right? Because considering that was the thing, he loved the space, and I'm just.
Well, I don't think anything really would have. I mean, my buddy who kind of got me into this whole scene, or just hit me to it, CRB, circles, this kind of stuff. CR with being maybe the exception, but Neil was the cog in the wheel, so he was kind of leading the charge, and all this stuff kind of remains in some ways. He at least ignited that fire. He's watching over us to make sure we continue the pulse.
Absolutely.
Pulse, man.
Absolutely. And there's all kinds of, come in sometime and we'll just tell Neil stories.
Absolutely. No, we'll dedicate a whole session, but I mean, Neely is Cowboy Neil at the wheel.
Yeah. Jeez, I love it.
Mr. Hesser.
Hey, buddy.
Much love, man.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
All right, continued success. This is the
right.
Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you later.